Honestly, thank you so much. Jim, why don't you come out here? We're going to talk about IJM. Jim comes from Washington, D.C. Why don't you welcome Jim as he talks to us. Jim Martin, thank you so much for being here, sir. And you work for IJM. You're the head of, what's your title?
My title is Vice President of Spiritual Formation.
I'm going to pretend I haven't done this already twice and ask you your title. What's your title again, Jim? I forgot since the 920. So Vice President of Spiritual Formation, that sounds like my title around here. It's good.
In a certain kind of way.
Just kidding. It's an amazing organization you're a part of. Now, a lot of these guys don't necessarily know what it does or what it's about. So there's a video, a 3-minute video that captures what IJM does, and then we'll come back and talk to Jim about your role and how you guys do what you do. Let's watch that.
So this is the target establishment. First suspect, view for our victims.
And remember, if there's a hazard or dangerous situation, move yourself to a position of cover.
We've handed him over to the police.
We saw about 1,200 little kids and found out that they were in fact trafficked and they were in fact slaves. These little kids are on this boat. They are not fed. They are abused beyond imagination.
We got to cut you up.
This is the girl. Whenever something like this comes, I imagine in my mind that girl is found.
We have operations all over the world, rescuing people from slavery. Because today there are criminals who abuse children, sell girls.
How old is she? 12. 12? How much? 30? Yeah, maybe.
And force families into slavery. Criminals prey on the easiest target, the world's poor, because they expect no one to defend them.
Pareho po tayong mga tao. Hindi po tayo ibagay or hayop na pwedeng gamitin lang sa pansarili.
But today, there are thousands of people gathering to seek justice for those in slavery. We are a group of lawyers, counselors, activists, and supporters. We are called International Justice Mission. And together, we form the largest international anti-slavery organization in the world. But slavery won't come to an end until criminals know they can't get away with it. So we partner with local police to arrest and prosecute criminals. This sends a message to slave owners. We will not go away. We stay with the survivors until they are healed, until they are free.
Natulungan po ako ng IJM sa pamamagitan po na sa case ko, sa pagtulong po nila na ma-overcome ko po yung fear.
Each year, we rescue thousands of slaves and protect millions around the world. We are transforming how justice systems protect their citizens. To those who are still enslaved, we promise to find you. We will get you home to your families so you can have the freedom you deserve.
All right. So obviously, amazing work. Give us the thesis, where was IJM born out of, what kind of problem, and how did it all come about?
Sure. One of the invisible problems affecting the poor today is this issue of violence that is just rampantly existent among the world's poor. We know about poverty, we know about lack of water, we know about lack of food, But the World Bank informed us, informed the world several years ago that 4.5 billion people in our world are living outside of the reach of the rule of law. So for more than half of the people in the world today, the challenge for them, the basic challenge for them, is that they're just not safe.
Yeah.
So IJM exists. It sprang out of the founder, Gary Haugen, whose voice you heard on this video, was working for the Department of Justice back in the early 1990s. And in 1994, many of you will remember, the Rwandan genocide broke out. And the U.S. State Department was looking for someone who could go and contribute to the investigation into the genocide. Right. And they did a national search, and Gary's resume happened to have the things they were looking for on it, which was work with corrupt police departments, time living on the continent of Africa, and mass grave experience, if you believe some people can have that on their resume. So Gary's name comes up, and he gets sent over and ends up being the lead investigator into the entire Rwandan genocide. One of the things you may not know about how the genocide was executed, though, was that actually most of the killing happened in churches. So people ran into churches for safety and ended up being killed there. So a lot of the work was actually identifying the bodies as best as could be done. And so Gary would be inside these small church buildings, picking through human remains and thinking.
And he was in there documenting how they died, like machete, gun, but child, woman, like that. Isn't that when he, in his book, The Locust Effect, that's how it starts, with kind of this real stark image of him sitting in this church, just kind of looking at skulls and the way that they were
Yep, because in order to bring justice in a situation like this, you need to gather all the facts, and many of them are just absolutely gruesome. So in the process of doing this, of course, Gary, as a faithful Christian man, has scripture sort of floating through his head in the midst of these gruesome situations, like Isaiah 61, and this call to the church to engage, right? Because his realization in Rwanda was that most people, when they happen upon a tragedy like this, ask the question, where is God when these people are suffering so horribly? And Gary realized maybe the more important question to ask is actually, where are God's people when people in the world are suffering so horribly? So he comes back to the States and he decides, I'm just going to look for a Christian organization that I can work for that will prevent this kind of violence against the poor. He went out looking and found there really wasn't any, and so he decided he would start one, and that's where International Justice Mission came from.
Yeah, and if you watch Gary's presentation, if you don't have time to read The Locust Effect, you can watch his 15-minute TED Talk. It's one of the most watched TED Talks. And his whole thesis was, we often talk about eliminating poverty in the world, and so we throw hundreds of millions of dollars in organizations, and we try to, get people water and get them food and get them clothes. But one of the issues is, if you don't stop, the way to actually stop poverty is to stop violence. Because if you could build a well outside of a village, but if every time a woman goes to get water from it, she's raped or beaten or her brothers are murdered or whatever, you'll never end the actual cycle of poverty. And so the Locust Effect is all about how do we actually go and so you guys are doing, frontline dangerous work. So now we've talked about what you do, talk about how you actually do it on the ground. What does it look like?
Sure. Our IJM teams around the world, we work in 18 different communities around the world, about 800 of us worldwide. So what the teams are composed of is groups of lawyers and investigators and social workers and a bunch of support staff, a whole bunch of Christian professionals that are coming together to do several things. One, to investigate the places where these crimes are going on. So our investigators undercover will go into brothels, they'll go into brick kilns, they'll go into rice mills, and they'll document the abuse. They'll be the first person these suffering people ever see that actually cares about them and wants to rescue them. So they'll document the abuse with pictures, they'll get the story and names, they'll bring that back to the IJM office, and the lawyers will work together to build an unassailable case about how the law is being broken by these people's imprisonment and enslavement. And so that case then will be taken by the IJM team to local secure government contacts, police, government officials, and we will tell them about the abuse that's happening, and we will say, we will support you in an operation to rescue these people if you will commit to doing that operation. If you will commit to doing your job, we will bring all the resources we have to bear to support you in doing that. And we've done this hundreds upon hundreds of times all over the developing world.
So how many slaves do you figure IJM in the last 20 years have set free?
Well, we track this really, really carefully, so I actually know the number. It's actually 31,652.
Wow, that's very specific. Good work.
But one of the things to realize is,
It's amazing.
as wonderful as that is for those 31,000 plus people, the reality is this work, because we're not just rescuing the slaves, we're actually arresting the perpetrators and sending them to jail. And that creates this massive deterrent effect, because the criminals who are perpetrating these crimes, they may be brutal, but they're not brave. And so if you can actually prove to them that they will go to jail if they continue to do this, then they stop doing it.
Yeah.
And so our work is actually protecting more than 2 million people in our project areas.
Gotcha.
2 million people that will never be abused like this in the first place, which is what we really want.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you go in front lines, you're dealing with, like, we can't identify, you're talking about 4 billion people that are living in a situation that they don't have lawyers, judges, or police just protecting them. So they're just kind of out there. And so much of the world is living in that scenario. But you guys go in and you start giving them a voice and fighting for them and all that stuff. But that's not safe work. You've actually, people have been killed, which you would expect doing this kind of stuff. Recently in Kenya, one of your own lawyers got murdered. Why don't you tell us that story?
Sure, there was a man in Kenya who had a very common Kenyan experience. His name was Josephat Mwenda. He was shaken down by the police one day. He's a taxi driver, drives a motorcycle taxi. The police pull him over and accuse him of something that he hasn't done, some traffic violations or something, to get some money out of him. And then it doesn't go all that well, and a gun goes off, and Josephat is shot in the arm. It's not sure if it's negligence or outright mean violence, but they then arrest him to cover up the crime of him being shot. So he goes to jail for something that he didn't do. In the process, he's quite gravely injured in the arm. In order to cover this up, the police charge him with another set of crimes, including driving without a reflective jacket or driving without a helmet, all during the time when he couldn't even drive his motorcycle because his arm was so gravely wounded. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of the cycle of shakedown that normal Kenyans experience. So we took on Josephat's case. And what that looks like is we assign lawyers to his case, we take him to court, and we defend him to the extent of the law, and we seek to see that his perpetrators are brought to account. Well, he's showing up one day at court for an appearance along with with a man named Willie Kamani, who's on our staff. He's worked as a lawyer in police abusive violence cases. He's actually working in a security function during this to make sure that everyone is safe. Right. And they are being driven by a driver named Josephat Mwenda. And they go to the court appearance, and then as they're leaving the court, all three of them in their car are abducted. And it turns out they're abducted by local police authorities, who are the ones that are actually responsible for the crimes in the first place. Yep. So they disappear for several days. I actually deployed to Kenya during that time to be with our staff team in Kenya. And on the 8th day of their disappearance, the three bodies turned up in a river about 75 kilometers outside of Nairobi.
Right. So this is real work. This is not safe stuff. You guys are on the front end of, you're eliminating you're going after judges, police, corrupt bureaucrats. I mean, this is amazing work you're doing, and it's all done through and driven by the gospel.
That's right.
Yeah, talk about that.
The staff in Kenya who've been through this really difficult and challenging time, I think what they would say if they were here is they would say, Mark, I'm so glad you read Isaiah 61. You read from Isaiah 61 today, because it's such a good reminder for us that if we're actually going to, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, recovery sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to break yokes of oppression.
Jim's an ex-pastor, so now he's starting to get preachy. Chill out.
They would say, our Kenyan friends would say, whoever convinced us that this would be safe, right, that embodying this gospel would actually be safe. Yeah. So they're grieving the loss of their friend and their colleague. We as an organization are grieving, but the reality is God has called us into this work of rescue. He has rescued us so that we might become rescuers for others.
Yeah, that's good. Has there been other scenarios like that where your guys have either been killed or threatened or abused or whatever?
Yeah, we've had credible threats in places like Africa and places like the Philippines, people tailed and things like that.
Yeah.
But we're as careful as we know how to be. So our investigative staff are people that have long careers in the military or law enforcement. We recently, 3 or 4 years ago, hired a VP of investigations to work out of DC to run the whole investigations team. And the guy we found for that job, his former post was as the director of NCIS, not the TV show, but the Naval Criminal Investigative Services. So this is a guy, Mark, who really knows his work well and is working to keep our staff as safe as they possibly can be.
Yeah, that's good. So tell us a couple, kind of give us a face to this whole thing, because thousands and thousands of people. Give us 1 or 2 stories of stuff you guys have done.
Yeah, I could tell you a story about a man named Rahman. Rahman grew up in southern India, and as often happens in this sort of debt-bonded slavery scenario, is that the bondage will transfer from one generation to the next. So when we met Rahman, his grandfather had been a slave before him, his father before him, and Rahman was now working in that same rice mill. So he had been brought in because the owner made him responsible for the debt that his family owed, and his life consisted of working 14 to 18 hours a day, boiling, drying, bagging, and stacking tons and tons of rice. That's what he did. And he's supposed to be working on the debt. He's supposed to be working off the debt, but the longer he works, the more deeply in debt he becomes, because that's the way the owner has arranged things. Right. This is all happening because of a man named Mr. Kandasamy, who owns the rice mill and has been running it this way for years. We have him on undercover video camera, just sort of laughing about this, saying, yes, for 25 years I've run my business this way. And the investigator undercover asks him, well, what happens if the slaves run away? And he says, oh, we won't let them do that. We'll track them down and bring them back and we'll beat them. So this is sort of how it works unless someone intervenes. And so IJM's investigators come and they meet Rahman, and there's an investigation that happens, and then that process I described where we build the case and we take it to a secure local authority, and then we go in on the day of the operation with local authorities, and Rahman and his family and 34 other people are rescued on that day. They're given a certificate of, that says, you are now free, that debt no longer holds sway over you, and the Indian government actually pays them restitution. And then they enter into IJM's 2-year aftercare program where they're cared for and they're given skills that they can then use and leadership training. And Rahman actually becomes an elected official in his village, and he's now working to see that electricity and water are brought to the 80 people in his village. He's like a local politician now. And Mr. Kandasamy, he actually went to jail. He was convicted under an old statute on the Indian books called habitually dealing with slaves.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. You were talking earlier about internet scenario with kids. What was that one?
A little boy named Marco in the Philippines. One of the things that's happening in places like the Philippines, as the internet becomes more and more available, more and more ubiquitous, in countries like the Philippines where English is spoken widely, this becomes an opportunity for criminals to exploit vulnerable people. Because now pedophiles can sit behind their computers in London, England, and they can abuse children over the internet in the Philippines. So this boy Marco lives with his little brothers and sisters. He's 7, he's got a sister as young as 2. The cousins come over often because their mom has a sister in the area. And it turns out what's going on is via webcam, the mom and the sister are actually exploiting these children and making them available on the internet. Images of Marco and his family have been broadcast to 5 different continents, to 19 different countries, including the UK, the US, and Canada. In London, a pedophile was arrested and his computer was seized, and on the computer they found images of the Philippines, very clearly from the Philippines. And so IJM was called in along with the Philippines National Police to do an investigation to see if we could find out where the source was coming from. This is really challenging in the Philippines because an IP address in the Philippines doesn't just point to one machine, it actually points to a whole neighborhood. So it took about 6 months, but eventually we traced it back all the way to Marco's mom and his sister. So an operation happens, and Marco and his siblings and his cousins are able to be removed from that situation of violence and brought to a place of safety. So they're now in an aftercare home beginning the process of healing, and the mom and the sister are facing legal charges.
That's amazing. So how does it work when we do a golf tournament, we raise money, we give it to you, and you're focusing on particular parts of the world. So what does that money do? Like you're talking about $250 per person to save them and rehabilitate. Talk about what it actually looks like.
This sort of gift, this sort of money is really the only way that IJM can function, right? We exist largely on the generosity of individuals and churches doing exactly what you're doing today. So every year we're needing to raise money so that we can deliver services for free to people like Marco and to people who are in desperate need. So how it works out if we average out the work and its cost in Chennai, it tends to work out to be about $250 per individual. Each operation generally is probably costing more money than that because generally we're rescuing more than one person at a time. But what it's paying for, it's allowing excellent legal defense to make sure that perpetrators are held accountable. It's allowing for professional counseling to be given to people who are victimized and to make sure that through the course of this 2-year aftercare program, people are set up to be successful at the end and to no longer be vulnerable. We want to leave all of our clients in a better position than they were before they were first abused.
Yeah. And you were saying sometimes that the legal stuff can take 7-8 years worth of work.
Yeah, and we will not go away. We will be there for the long haul.
It's good. And like the video said, like oftentimes these criminals, these guys do this stuff because there is no one fighting for these people. There is no voice for.
It's so true. The word we use is impunity. People do this because they can get away with it, right? And so if you actually enforce the law against these crimes, then everything changes. In fact, in the Philippines, we did a 4-year test on a sex trafficking operation. We started operations in a place where we'd never done work before, and we did those operations for 4 years. Before we started, we measured the level of victimization of minors in the brothel system in this Tri-City area where we were working. We worked for 4 years, and we wanted to prove that we could reduce the overall victimization of minors in the system by 20%. So we wanted to measure it 4 years later and find 20% fewer minors. So we do this, we run operations for 4 years. It ends up being about 120 rescues, about 80 arrests, and some of those cases are just now starting to come to trial at the end of that 4-year window. That doesn't sound like a lot, right? 120 rescues, 80 arrests. It turns out, though, at the end of that 4-year cycle, we didn't prove a 21% reduction. We proved a 79% reduction in the number of minors available for sex in that Tri-City area. And that was independently verified by a third-party group of criminologists.
That's amazing. Good for you. Good work. It's good. I don't know what else the church would really supposed to do other than this kind of stuff. So we're behind you, we're helping you, and we'll continue to do so. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks so much,
Yeah,
Mark.
that's great.